Welcome to Real Cash Flow, the only show that takes you full circle with your money, covering stocks, bonds, commodities, currencies, crypto, insurance, and real estate. I'm your host, Andrew Michael Arroyo. Let's get started. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are diving into faith-driven investing and why investing in the United States is so important during this next season. I'm joined in the studio by Nick Bonner. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Excellent. If you haven't listened to our previous episode on impact investing, I'm going to encourage you to press pause, go back and listen to that episode because that's the foundation and the context for today's discussion. Now, today we will be referencing impact investing, but we're going to discuss faith-driven investing, which is a form of impact investing. Now, what we discussed last episode was simply that all investments have some form of an impact, whether you realize it or not. And anyone who is pursuing good things on this earth and wants their stewardship of the money that's been entrusted to them by God to go a long way and have impact in the kingdom should take a hard look at faith-driven investing. Because what's happening, this movement that has started, and it's not just here in the U.S., it is internationally, and it's not just the Christian religion. We are seeing it in the Jewish religion, the Muslim religion, the Mormon religion. We're seeing it in many religions. People are aligning their faith with their pocketbook. So let's dive right in. Today, we're going to be talking about the Christian community that's near and dear to me and Nick's heart as followers of Christ. And we're going to discuss certain groups that have really coined this term faith-driven investing and have led the movement. And we're also going to focus on the United States. Why are we focused here on the U.S.? A lot of people have given up on the U.S. Why aren't we looking internationally to some of the emerging markets? We think those markets are awesome, and we certainly want to support those markets. But first and foremost, we need to take care of what's going on in our own backyard. So I know this is a passion point for you, Nick, investing here in the U.S. rather than being international. And why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So with regard to the work that we do with Pine Tops, a lot of this comes from the understanding that in spite of being the wealthiest Christian nation in history, the church in the U.S. has declined. And that's a problem because the U.S. is by far the biggest exporter of missionaries' money and trained seminary students in the world. And so we have problems right here at home that we need to address. We got some house cleaning to do here in the U.S. And so we've got a podcast for another day with the Great Opportunity Report of a bunch of homework, basically a big research study that we did on the United States, not really addressing why this matters so much. I'll speak to that. I can speak to that briefly later. But what does the church look like in 2050 if things continue the way they have? And what could we be doing as image bearers of Christ to address some of these concerns? Let's just assume that prayer has to be a big part of it. Like, what are the actionable items? Let's also assume that God wants to call people back to himself in the United States, right? What can we be doing to participate in the work that God is doing? So yeah, that report's great. Would love to unpack that in more detail sometime.
And here's the great news. There's a movement already started. There's several movements, and we're going to talk about those one by one. I'm going to share some groups that both me and Nick are a part of that we've really seen grown from inception. The first is simply faith-driven investor. It's named the same as the movement, right? There's faith-driven investors coming together. These are small groups that get together and just help share ideas, and people that have a heart to start to gear their money and resources and investments towards things that align with their values. So why don't you share a little bit about the faith-driven investor groups?
Yeah, it's super exciting to see people rising up. There's a phrase that a guy named Mel McGowan with Plain Joe Studios shared with me once. The man is a storyteller, and he once shared a phrase with me that has lit fire. I don't think he even knows how much impact he's had with it. Hopefully, he listens to this someday. But the phrase is from C.S. Lewis's book, The Chronicles of Narnia. And the phrase is, Aslan is on the move, right? It's this idea that like Jesus is coming back. He is at work, and those who are dialed into him are all singing from the same hymn book, and we're all getting these downloads from the Holy Spirit of what he's up to, and it is super exciting to see the expressions of how these are coming to bear. And so as we talk about this greater movement, as we talk about the various groups that are a part of it, it's really important that you see this through a lens of unity, that you see a unified people who are showing up in response to a much bigger picture than themselves and playing their part, like an instrument in a symphony, like a member of the body, a body part, all in motion to tackle one much greater task. Um, so so there's FDI. It's a great place to start. Um, faith-driven investor. The faith-driven movement in general has subsets of faith-driven investor, faith-driven entrepreneur, faith-driven athlete. They've got some things with youth they're working on launching here in the near future that are also exciting. And so let's just unpack that one for a quick second. So faith-driven investor, there are a variety of ways to get connected. They have small group studies that help those who are new to impact investing basically get a sense for what the world of impact investing is. What does this even mean? But as we zoom out on FDI, there's sort of three big food groups. There's targeted content, there's accessible community, there's connection to the greater movement of faith-driven investing in general. So let me just address each one of those food groups for a second, or those buckets. Targeted content, they've got podcasts, books, video series, an annual conference, and a newsletter. All of this stuff is free. I think you've got to pay to attend the conference, but and maybe the book might cost something. But I mean, it's a nonprofit organization, which actually is an important point to make. I sometimes hear naysayers say that like maybe the intention behind all this could be nefarious and that somebody somewhere is trying to profit. Let me assure you, there's no money changing hands here. There's no cost, no catch. The people that are driving this movement are disadvantaging themselves to help others. The primary movers behind all this are philanthropists who already made a bunch of money. They're in the back half of their life, converting everything that they've done from success into significance to the greatest extent possible. And so just approach this with a heart of trust if you can. Bucket two, accessible community. You've got foundation groups, global prayer. There are watch parties, which is basically just a group of people that get together to attend one of the conferences in a localized form, because their annual conferences for each of these various groups is only once a year. They're solving the world's greatest problems, which is their connection with the Halftime Institute, and they're rolling that out to help basically high net worth families make a family battle plan for what the second half of their life looks like. Or hopefully it's not second half. Hopefully people start earlier, before their victory lap, and get to business. But helping people be more intentional about holistically how they're stewarding their capital and their social connections and their talents and everything that God's given them. Bucket three, connect to the movement. They've got demo days where you can see real life faith-driven entrepreneurs who are coming up with great solutions to real problems that are out there and looking for funding. Sometimes that could be for philanthropic, but usually it's for some form of market rate or maybe even concessionary investment. There's the Unmuted series, which is similar to that. There's the best of the movement. They've got a bunch of stuff on their website where you can they love top 10 lists. You can get top 10 lists or a variety of links throughout their website that will introduce you to uh, different industries and topics that might be of interest to you and who the players are in those spaces. And then lastly, there's partners. So there's a ton of partnership and collaboration in this space where people are all helping each other out. And so, um, so those are that's sort of like a quick high level overview of FDI. I don't know if you want me to dive into some of the others, Andrew, but I can do that as well.
No, that's great. That gives us the big picture. And just as a recap, the three buckets, it's great content. You can receive education. You can access small groups. There's no cost. Be surrounded by 5 to 10 individuals that go through a 6 to 8 week course and meet for half an hour to an hour and just learn about what faith driven investing really means. And finally, a marketplace online catalog with impact investments. And they have filled a gap, thank God, because I have to tell you, I felt like a Lone Ranger 15 years ago when I was trumpeting, biblical principles in my business, and there just didn't seem to be a lot of other entrepreneurs anywhere to be found. And now there's a great collective, a movement, and people are being inspired to incorporate Judeo-Christian values in their business and stand strong and say, this is what I believe. So it's awesome. Now let's continue on. Let's move on to the Christian Economic Forum. This is a much larger community, if you will, not necessarily from a scale standpoint. I know FDI reaches worldwide and probably has touched 100,000 people. Maybe the Christian Economic Forum has done something similar, but the get-togethers is what I'm referencing. I know they have an annual conference, and that seems to be quite large. And just explain exactly what that is.
Yeah, probably, I don't know, 200 to 300 people is who are attending their annual event in any given year, but their membership base is much larger than that. So maybe approaching 1,000. I'm not quite sure, frankly, but CEF, Christian Economic Forum, is a community of humble and effective entrepreneurs, business leaders, investors, innovators, um, experts in their field who are using the principles of stewardship to solve problems in a way that brings God the glory. It's a subset of Crown Ministries, and they partner together. So think of Crown Ministries as like helping edify people on how to think about what to do with their money and from a theological biblical perspective, and then Christian Economic Forum is like a really practical outlet for business people specifically to go tackle that stuff.
That's great. And let's zoom in on what the experience looks like because I think we shared some good context on FDI. You can plug into these small groups. You have this annual conference. You can jump into the marketplace if you're looking for some investments that match with your values. But the economic forum, as I recall, that's like a weekend once a year, correct? That you're going to surround yourself with others and really just hearing what is going on economically worldwide.
Yeah, it's like a 3 day event, plus or minus. And beyond that, it's beyond just the conference. They're really sort of in the process of building out their membership offering in more detail now. There's other events to connect with people throughout the year. They've got regular prayer events. They've got an email that goes out with opportunities for investment or philanthropy or connection, or just they're very biased toward action. And so it's a really fun group of people because you've got all these business leaders who are showing up and they're like, "Hey, I'm passionate about solving this. Let's connect and just talk about it, and then see where that leads." And so they've already had some really cool things that they've, as a greater community, been able to tackle. And it is an international community. This year's conference is out in Europe. So I want to say in Scandinavia, somewhere in there.
And would it be fair to say that this is the Davos version for the Christian community of the Economic Forum?
Yeah, that's a common comparison. And I think that's probably fair to say, although will also say that is not their intention. The intention was not to like say, "Oh, we're the Christian version of that." Um, it just it just happens to fit pretty well, is how I guess I would frame that up.
Excellent. Well, let's continue on. Praxis is the next on my list here. And I was introduced to Praxis probably over 10 years ago when I was attending a conference called The Gathering. And these are young entrepreneurs that are the next gen of innovative ideas. It's essentially a venture building ecosystem, bit of an incubator that is bringing forth both for profit and nonprofit, with probably more of an emphasis on nonprofit orgs and entrepreneurs that have the next big idea. So let's dive a little bit into Praxis and how someone could get involved both from the entrepreneurial standpoint, but also from an investment or philanthropic standpoint.
Oh man, I love all of these groups. Praxis is one of those groups that I just have so much respect for because a lot of the work that FDI and CEF and these others that we're going to get into is being done by standing on the shoulders of what Praxis has already built for us in terms of robust language and thought around what it means um, to be a Christian at work, understanding that the work is something that God gave us pre-fall, and how can we and should we be coming alongside the work that He's doing to live out uh, our own calling, our own gifts that God's given us in redemptive ways. And so, yes, it is a venture building ecosystem with a redemptive imagination, is how they define themselves. They support founders, funders, and innovators who are motivated by their faith to address the major issues of our time. And so they have a for-profit accelerator, a nonprofit accelerator. They've got an innovation lab recently that they launched, um, and they have regular conferences where and a lot of content that they put out as well. A lot of these rule of life books that you may have seen um, to help people better understand what that looks like, what redemptive imagination could look like for them, uh, whether they're a founder, a funder, an innovator, or an employee, whatever. Uh, and it's really exciting the work that they have done, and I can't wait to see the fruit of their labor, which sometimes grows on other people's trees. Another decade from now, even.
Well, I know it's certainly grown on our organization's trees. Praxis was another one that was influential in my perspective as I was attending those conferences as a gathering participant. They would have these lunches that would be, one of the days. It was optional to go. And I was typically already receiving so much great content and information at the main conference. I would just pop in for a little bit to see what was going on. But I have to tell you, I was so intrigued. It would draw me in with these entrepreneurs that were set to, light the stage and change the world, and the compelling visions that the Holy Spirit had downloaded and how Praxis had nurtured them. And they've published a few books, but one of the small ones that they've published is this redemptive framework. And I want you to share about that a little bit, because people hear the word redemptive. What they don't hear is the opposite word, which is exploitive. And sadly, there is so much of the Western capitalism structure that is based on exploitation. We don't like to admit it in the West. We like to say, well, that's just overseas and in these certain countries that exploit their citizens and oppress. But the fact of the matter is that there's very, very few business models here in the United States that are redemptive. And so it really flips everything on its head. And just as Christ served those that he was around, and he humbled himself, and he didn't think of himself in, this hierarchical pyramid style situation where the top cream of the crop, the leaders benefit, and everybody below is exploited. He flipped it upside down. And this little book, I've handed it out and given it to so many people, especially entrepreneurs early in their journey, to help them understand what you're building should serve others and reflect Christ's character. And here's the framework to do it. So, share a little bit just about that redemption versus exploitation.
Yeah, sure. So they've got so many great tools, and one of my favorites is one of their originals, which is a visual. If you can imagine three sort of concentric circles, where in the center you have this concept of exploitative, which is unfortunately, a lot of companies and groups and even just people with the way that they think um, and operate and lead. And then the next concentric circle outside of that would be, ethical, which is now thankfully like sort of in vogue, at least in the US, of like, people that care about some form of ethics with the way in which they operate. But God calls us to a higher standard. Jesus calls us to the third circle going outwards, which is they would define as redemptive. And so let's just take one example where we could talk about operations, right? Like how you operate a company. Well, if you're exploitative, you use people. If you're ethical, you respect people. But if you're redemptive, well, then you bless people, right? And then us take a couple others because this is fun. So leadership. Why do we build things? Well, if you're exploitative, you're living for yourself. If you're ethical, you're trying to improve yourself. But if you're redemptive, you're dying to yourself. And then that goes back to like, I think it's Proverbs 11:10 of like when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. Like, why are they dying to? They're disadvantaging themselves for the city. That's why the city's rejoicing, right? And I'll give you one last one. So let's talk about like strategy. So the things that we build. If you're exploitative, you're leveraging culture around you for your own uh, selfish purposes. If you're ethical, you will advance culture in some way, shape, or form. But if you're redemptive, you're going to renew culture. And so as you start to think about these different frameworks, it's just a lot of fun and very edifying um, for whatever role you've got. And I've got on my desk here a bunch of booklets of, redemptive business, the rule of life, the redemptive nonprofit, redemptive investing. I mean, the story just keeps going on, and it's really helpful for uh, for the edification of the saints.
Amen. Well, that's a good segue into our final featured group, and that is redemptive real estate. And this is personal for me because, as I mentioned, I felt like a lone ranger for so many years, especially in the early 2000s or 2010s, that decade. But now there has been a collective who's come together. They just did their second annual conference. So this is very recent of real estate operators, entrepreneurs, investors that have all said enough is enough. Real estate needs to be on this playing field. It's the biggest asset class in the world. How do we make our investments and our organizations reflect the image of Christ? Let's share ideas, let's get together, and let's work together to utilize this incredibly valuable asset class to bless people. So, why don't you unpack redemptive real estate and their vision, mission, and how this is all coming together?
The vision of redemptive real estate, again, building on a lot of the language of Praxis, is to connect, inspire, and resource like-minded real estate industry leaders so that people can honor God and their communities through their work. So their mission is to grow the impact, the influence, and the investments of redemptive real estate leaders. So, like you said, real estate is by far the largest asset class, and it's a unique asset class in that there's an opportunity for placemaking. It's a very physical investment in which you can create, you're literally creating space where people meet and connect and divine collisions can occur. And so a lot of the heartbeat behind it is how does iron sharpen iron in this investment category? How can we spur one another on in creative and excellent and redemptive ways to um, to pursue our individual callings that God's called us to, and the greater work that He's up to right here.
It's an exciting movement, and I can't wait to see what comes about when you get that many real estate people in one room moving in one direction. So, as a summary for the listener, we covered four groups, four organizations: faith driven investor, which has some subsectors: faith driven entrepreneur, faith driven athlete. It's all part of a faith driven movement. We covered the Christian Economic Forum, we covered Praxis, and we covered redemptive real estate. And there are other groups out there, but these are four primary ones that both Nick and I are familiar with, we've participated in, we can vouch for that they've had life changing moments in our life. And in future episodes, we'll dive into some of the most profound articles, blog posts, white papers that have been published. For instance, investing rooted in a biblical worldview, or the four quadrants of a faith-driven portfolio, and a bigger vision for real estate investing. So stay tuned. We will be releasing some episodes coming up here with a market pulse. I know we're getting into the year and people are curious on our thoughts about where the equities are going, the commodities, the real estate space. A lot's happening with a lot of new executive orders and a lot of changes in our political structure, our economic structure. So be ready for some level of volatility. We hope the message has blessed you. We will catch you on the next episode. God bless, and go find a faith-driven investing movement to be a part of.